Happy New Year. How about that? It's another year. I'm Doug White, and it's the Security Weekly News, episode 352. Welcome to the week of 7 January 2024. How about that? We've got jobs and money, QNAP, NIST, Spectral blur, Stuxnet returns, Swatting, Volkswagen, Jason Wood, and more on this edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul's Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul's Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
All right, welcome to Security Weekly News. Hope you had a happy new year if you enjoy celebrating arbitrary celestial events. And like that strange rash you got in summer camp, we're back with a whole new year of Security Weekly News. Well, this week, a study from Pinpoint Search Group, which is a cybersecurity recruitment firm who should be calling me with a great offer any day now. But according to them, cybersecurity transactions increased in 2023, but the amount of funding secured by companies decreased significantly. Now, what they're referring to, if you aren't sure, is the funding of new startups and funding rounds along with mergers and acquisitions. So in 2023, there were a total of 437 documented transactions, which included 346 funding rounds and 91 mergers and acquisitions. Now, that was up from 303 funding rounds in 2022. But in 2023, the companies only raised $8.7 billion with a B compared to $14.5 billion with a B in 2022, which represented a 40% drop in the amount of funds raised. The big ones were identity detection and response, government risk and compliance, that kind of stuff, which is about what you would expect. But the report said, quote, "While the industry experienced real pain in 2023, the demand for security solutions continues to grow. The impact on the professionals in the space will depend on how quickly investors and founders can transition from early state innovations to growth." And of course, this is a pretty much a standard business model of new things. And you've seen this with just about every new thing that came along. And you have a lot more funding on, startup innovation stuff early. And as the market starts to get a little more mature, you have to start seeing, which companies grow and so forth. Now, that led into a report. It sounded weird to me, but the data seemed pretty valid. According to this data in this report, it said that only 700 IT jobs were added in the United States last year compared to 267,000 the year prior. That's why it sounded odd, right? 700, not 700,000, but 700 compared to 267,000 the previous year. And I felt it seemed kind of strange, but apparently their data, I went on through, was looking at their data. It came from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is, as reliable as anything. But and basically they speculated that a lot of these numbers were affected heavily by mass layoffs, which we all know happened last year, and some of you probably too much. So I guess in that regard, when you take all the layoffs into consideration, it's not that shocking. And layoffs have kept growth in IT flat for the past year. But they said that 21,000 IT jobs were created in Q4 of 2023. So maybe it's a turning point. It said there were currently 88,000 jobs open in one report. Of course, there's a big difference between an open job and a job anybody would take too, right? I mean, so you see all these open jobs and then you maybe look at them and they're not so great, because I literally got approached about a job. It was late last year. Somebody called me and said, would you be interested in this? And basically they were paying about $20 an hour. And they had no benefits. It was contract work, and it required you to move. You had to actually be physically in a state that you couldn't actually pay me to live in. I mean, I was just like, no. But they did make a big point about how the job required travel, but they didn't compensate you for it. And I was like, so wait, I have to pay my own way at this price point? I don't think so. But anyway, according to the report, they had different numbers in different places. But in the report, they also said there were 100,000 unfilled jobs currently and 110,000 unemployed IT professionals. Now, what that tends to mean is that, it could mean that companies just don't understand the marketplace. So if, people want to make X dollars and they're paying Y dollars, maybe you're going to have to pay a little bit more. That's called basic economics. But it also can mean there's a skills mismatch, because we saw this a long time ago with when they were laying off COBOL programmers like crazy. There were tons of people that were programmers, in quotes, sorry, COBOL people. And there were all these open programming jobs, because all the programming jobs, because I was working as a contract programmer, and we were doing C, and they had tons of jobs, and they couldn't fill them because the COBOL programmers didn't want the C jobs, and the C people didn't want to work for the COBOL pay, so it was kind of a problem. But they go on and describe all this as fallout partially from the pandemic. They said there was a lot of overhiring in the pandemic, and of course then the specter of AI. So they said AI is being introduced wherever anyone can. Probably too soon, but people are doing it. CEOs and CIOs have heard that AI is a solution to all the world's problems, so they're jumping on the bandwagon. But a lot of this, they said, the impact of most of this was at entry level, and it seems to be mostly in the customer service, telecommunications, and hosting automation areas. So the good news, it's always a cycle. And if you're in cyber, it's probably not that dire, because we know that everybody needs cyber, just like it's like networking administration. Everybody needs it. It's not going to go away anytime soon. So it'll fluctuate. Companies will go, we don't need all these clowns, and they'll lay people off. And 2 months later, they get hit with something and they hire them all back, and on and on and on. The report did say that management positions with AI skills, whatever the hell that means, are in the 150 to 250,000 per year range, and managers and developers are getting offers in the 125 to 165 range. So I know this is short shrift if you are currently unemployed, but keep trying, and it probably will eventually sort out. Or maybe try and pivot a little bit and put AI on your resume somehow if you're not in one of those non-hiring. If you're a bag boy but with AI, you got a much better opportunity. QNAP announced a bunch of patches for a dozen or more vulnerabilities on Friday. There were multiple high severity flaws in their operating systems of different products. One of those was called a prototype pollution flaw, which would allow a remote attacker to, quote, override existing attributes with ones that have an incompatible type, which may cause the system to crash. I was like, well, that doesn't sound bad at all. But that particular one is in the QTS versions 5.1 and QTS Hero versions. They also addressed a security defect in NetaTalk, which would allow attackers to execute arbitrary code remotely. That also very, very bad. And add to it without authentication, and it's like horrendous. They released patches for two other high severity vulnerabilities at Video Station, one of which was an SQL injection, and the other was an OS command injection, which also could be exploited over the network. There were other high-severity remote exploits in QMAGI, and they put out patches for QTS, QUTS Hero, QCal Agent, QMAGI were also released. So if you have any QNAP products, you might want to head over there and read the advisories. They did not say they had seen any exploitation of this in the wild, but regardless of all that, patch up. Now, I like NIST, if you know me, and I like NIST documents because, hey, they're free. And they're usually pretty good. But NIST just published a nearly 100-page document, which is titled Adversarial Machine Learning, a Taxonomy and Terminology of Attacks and Mitigation. Four big items they mentioned in this article were: one, adversarial machine learning attacks can be conducted with little knowledge of models or training data. That's pretty scary. Two, generative AI poses unique abuse risk compared with predictive AI. So generative AI is this modern stuff, and predictive AI is things that were based more on decision trees and things like that. So think an old chess game from like the 1980s versus a chess game currently. Three, attackers may remotely poison data sources to inject malicious prompts. Sounds pretty frightening, and I can see how that happens, and we've seen evidence of that. NIST warns there is no foolproof method for protecting AI from attackers' misdirection. It's out there, it's listening, so if people start pumping misinformation into it, it may well learn from that, just like, humans apparently do. The paper does have a bunch of mitigation strategies for most of these adversarial machine learning types. The author of the paper said that, quote, despite the significant progress AI and machine learning have made, these technologies are vulnerable to attacks that can cause spectacular failures with dire consequences. The author went on to say, quote, there are dire theoretical problems with securing AI algorithms that simply have not been solved yet. If anyone says differently, they're selling you snake oil. And I certainly agree with pretty much all those statements. I mean, just being able to poison data sets, of a neural net in 1988 was a bad thing, but you can certainly poison these things now. And we've already seen people doing that, both from a hacktivist perspective, like with artists and writers who've been saying, here's how you can poison art generation and things like that. And of course, we all know that this is very reflective of how we see humans being manipulated all the time with misinformation. I can't believe some of the stuff people think. I mean, there's people that think the earth is flat. I'm like, that's exactly data poisoning, if you ask me. But, usually when people realize they're being manipulated, they get angry. I'm not sure how an AI might react, but, Terminators, teeth, hair, and eyeballs all over the landscape, all that kind of stuff. The fun days are coming. But in the meantime, though, this means, your AI-enabled security dogs may just fall for the Quaalude and a taco tossed over the wall sort of attack. Logically, of course. Yeah, that kind of thing. Well, this was billed as the first malware of 2024. I don't know that I totally agree with that headline, but regardless, Spectral Blur is a new backdoor Trojan for macOS that was described last week. It appears that the malware is connected to North Korean malware, most likely Lazarus, which first had been targeting blockchain engineers last year. Proofpoint researcher Greg Lesnevich shared findings on this on his blog on the 3rd of January. This is, I think, where they came up with the first malware of the year. And then Patrick Wardle of Objective-C published a deeper analysis on the 4th of January. This malware, Spectral Blur, is sophisticated. It uses a pseudo terminal to remotely execute shell commands, which I thought was quite interesting. It also has encrypted communications to the command and control server, deletes its own file contents by overwriting them with zeros, and forks itself into multiple instances. Yeah. It was described as being similar to Candy Corn Rat from last year. Then that was directly associated with Lazarus, which is a known North Korean group. I always thought Candy Corn Rat was when a rat runs off with your snack on the 7 train, but now I know better. I like the name, though, Candy Corn Rat. But regardless, it sounds like a fairly powerful bit of nastiness. So it's kind of like that rat that ran off with my watch in the Cathedral Parkway station that time and might just have had a knife. I couldn't tell for sure, but, it would shock me a bit. Upper West Side rats are, they're banging. Well, you know how everyone in Paul's Security Weekly always likes to talk about Stuxnet. And Stuxnet is one of the most infamous or famous or whatever you want to call it events that ever happened in cybersecurity, especially early on. Well, according to this report, which was based on a story in a Dutch newspaper, the U.S. and Israel spent $1 billion with a B U.S. dollars to develop Stuxnet. Wow, that's pretty pricey. I wish I'd been on that team. But Stuxnet, if you are too young to remember, was built back in the early 2000s to sabotage Iranian nuclear development. So the West did not like the idea that Iran was developing, possibly nuclear weapons. I mean, they say they're not, that they're just doing it for peaceful purposes, but apparently somebody gets to decide. The report was published in a newspaper called Volkswagen, which is sorry, Dutch people, if I mispronounce that, but Volkswagen is a Dutch newspaper. The article says that a Dutch spy was used to release a Stuxnet virus into the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. And the Dutch government actually said that Eric von Saben, who is a 36-year-old spy, was working to sabotage the Iranian nuclear project, but they did not know that a cyber weapon was planning to be used. So I don't know what they were planning on him doing, like, I guess a James Bondy kind of thing of just tossing a hand grenade in the room and leaving and, adjusting your tie. One article I was reading, they misspelt the poor guy's name, and they called him Van Stabben. I was like, what? Van Stabben? I mean, come on, a spy named Van Stabben? Like, what a really, that's like the fakest spy name I've ever heard, Van Stabben. It's like Naughtius Maximus or Silius Sodus or something like that. Lance Van Stabben, I expect you to die, Mr. Bond. Oh, and Mr. Broccoli, call me. Anyway, I think Mr. Broccoli's dead, but, regardless. Anywho, Van Saben, or Saban, probably Saban, Van Saban, was working as an Iranian engineer as part of a project that started in 2004. So this is long-term spying stuff. 2004, and then they recruited Mr. Van Saben in 2005. I'm sorry, it probably is Saben because it's not a double A, so it's probably Saben. Mr. Von Saben in 2005. Von Saben then planted the malware in 2008 at a facility in Natanz. Now, Von Saben died. It gets better. Von Saben apparently died in a motorcycle crash in Dubai in 2009. I mean, Lance Van Stabben died in a motorcycle crash in Dubai. The report said there was no foul play involved. Okay, Lance Van Stabben. I'm using that name in the future, and you can watch for it. All right. Well, swatting, if you've never heard of it, and you probably have, is the latest tactic that's being used all over the place for all sorts of things, but it's now a tactic that's apparently being used by ransomware actors to convince people to pay up. Now, when I was a kid, calling the grocery store and asking if they had oleums in a can was a prank, and then you keep acting like, no, oleums, like oleums. And they're like, olives? No, oleums. What? I don't know what those are. Onions? No, oleums. O-L-I-U-M. They sell them everywhere. We just wanted to know if that was kind of prank. Or something a bit darker was calling someone's parents and pretending to be in dire need of a resupply of heroin. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Well, when will Billy be home, man? I'm getting shakes here. Like, he's my main dealer, dude. Can you just sell me some? People did stuff like that. But swatting is a whole new level. Basically, swatting, if you don't know what it is when someone calls the police and says something extreme is going on at the house next door. Like, there's a badger trafficking ring running out of my neighbor's property, and I think he has a Sherman tank parked out back and a flamethrower and is ready to use it. So you better send everything you got. And of course, when these things first happened, it was pretty dramatic when the whole SWAT team from the state police comes to your house and, kicks the doors in and everything, and you're sitting there in your underwear drinking whiskey going, what? But yeah, it's like that scene in Brazil where they put the straitjacket on you. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, it is a prank that gets people killed, which I think is sometimes the objective. Not cool. But this seems to be a growing tactic with ransomware attackers, or at least in the case of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle in November. The attackers issued swatting threats to the cancer center after they stole a bunch of medical records and said they were going to swat the patients. And the cancer center didn't immediately notify the Seattle police and the FBI. So you might want to add some policy to this stuff to notify the police and such if you lose or you have a breach. So, I'm definitely bringing this up at your local meetings with law enforcement or MSISAC or whatever, especially for local law enforcement who do get some of these calls as well. I know everybody's working to try and reduce this threat of swatting attacks in law enforcement because it's really dangerous. It wastes a lot of money and it causes a lot of stress and so forth. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Well, during the holidays, he cast off the shackles of modern life and lived the Neanderthal experience. In the wilds of New Jersey, there's a camp where you can live like the ancestors, naked, hunting mammoths, eating raw rat meat, experiencing intestinal parasites at the natural level, beard mites, scabies, and you die before you turn 20. But you do lose about 100 pounds in 2 weeks due to the worms that you contract in the whole process. It's not for everyone, but for some people, it's the only way. Please welcome new primitive Jason Wood.
Hey, everybody. So I didn't know mammoths were in New Jersey these days. Is that
everything's in New Jersey? It's at the old Action Park. You just head down there. They got a mammoth you can kill and eat and that kind of stuff. They've been cloning them or something. I don't know. Probably T-Rexes.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. Note to self, stay away. Hey, everybody. Good to be back with you. Hope everybody had a happy New Year and holiday season. This is one of those instances where Doug and I picked up on the same story. So I'm pretty much going to pick up where he left off on the swatting and the sinking to new lows here. I mean, we started out obviously with companies having their data locked up and being encrypted. You're not going to have a business unless you pay up. People get better at recovery, so they decide, well, now we'll threaten to leak data and embarrass you and put pressure on you that way. Now, like Doug says, we're going to call the cops and say, hey, we got some kind of hostage situation or something terrible, and yeah, we need to do the full law enforcement response with the SWAT team and all of the insanity that can involve. There have been several articles about this. I picked up on the article through the Register, but there was, the link that Doug shares in the show notes as well, about an intrusion that occurred at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle. And the data that was compromised included the usual mix of names, addresses, SNs, et cetera. And most of the times we look at names and addresses and we don't think, it's not good, but it's not what we would typically call terribly sensitive information. But now these folks are leveraging, or threatening rather, to leverage that to invoke a response by the police. And as Doug says, now they've had instances where people have been killed because of this, because somebody in the house reacts to, it's a really volatile situation. Somebody reacts badly, and somebody ends up getting killed because of it. The idea here, obviously, is this is going to amplify the pressure on the victim organization because nobody wants to get, that type of event where somebody gets hurt, or the media attention that comes from being used, having swatting related to your name. I found an article on databreaches.net, which actually included a quote from conversation they had with the schmucks that were behind this intrusion. In the end, the intruders, adversaries, whatever, decided that Fred Hutchinson was dragging out the communications too long. They were just talking and talking and talking and not getting anywhere. And the contact basically said Fred Hutchinson got upset when get upset when we threat to SWAT patients. And this is a quote from the article. SWAT patients, data breaches repeated. SWAT, they reiterated. Were you seriously considering SWAT, data breaches asked? Their answer was immediate and somewhat chilling. Why not? That's next level evil. Swatting cancer patients, data breaches responded. We did not, they answered. And it almost sounds like this sheepish, well, I didn't actually do it, so it's okay. Don't get mad at us for this. Folks, too late. You already sound like people who enjoy kicking puppies and kittens. So, yeah, you're gross. It was just freaking terrible. Now, what I thought was interesting about this was 2 days before this article was published, MSysSoft, Register covered MSysSoft calling for a complete ban, international ban on ransomware payments. They cited a blog post by two professors and a doctoral candidate from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, basically stating, and this is a quote, from 2016 to 2021, we estimate that ransomware attacks killed between 42 and 67 Medicare patients, end quote. And from reading that, there was some, they're saying basically Medicare patients die in the hospital at this rate. I think it was 3 in 100, but during a ransomware attack, that increases to 4 in 100. So they're basically saying that there is a negative connotation to patient outcomes when a medical center is undergoing a ransomware attack, which it wasn't terribly shocking, I suppose, since all the data is electronic these days anyhow. And so now, because of the the growing impact, economic impact, we have ransomware operations, and now studies indicating, or blog posts at least by researchers on loss of human life. EMSISoft and a few other security folks that they quoted are now backing the idea of an international ban on paying ransomware to these groups. I don't think there's much chance of getting a complete international ban on data breaches victims paying off a ransom. That's still something that happens with just your, kidnapping for ransom, where that is occurring and people are getting paid off. But let's say that such a ban was put in place. What do you think would happen? One, like I said, I don't think we're ever going to get a complete elimination of ransom being paid, even if it's on the side and trying to keep it on the down low. And it's against the law, but this is a way out. I do expect that, that would probably put a pretty significant dent in the ransomware operations themselves. They, you would have less people paying up, but in the meantime, you're going to have probably a huge push to get in as many ransom payments as they can, as enforcement is trying to be figured out and matured to prevent these payments from being made in the first place. So this would be a complete nightmare for the victim organizations. They probably want to, the ransomware groups probably want to test and see just how complete is this enforcement? How far is this going to go? And then, yes, we probably get more extreme. And, here we've got threats of people being swatted. My thought on this was, and to kind of echo what Doug is saying about, this is something that needs to be discussed in organizations. How are we going to respond to threats that aren't reputational or just limited to our business? How are we going to deal with it when it reaches out to the people whose data we were storing? The threats reach down to that level. People who, just happen to have their data there. In this case, cancer patients, but it could be any kind of, any type of person, depending on the business going on. This is, I really hate to, as I thought about it, the idea of, hey, let's think about some really terrible stuff here to, could somebody threaten to do this remotely? Could they actually try and hurt people in real life? Like, send out something to somebody to actually to inflict pain on somebody. In a hospital, for example, let's say, hey, pay up now, or, sometime in the future, we're just going to shut down critical equipment in the middle of in operating rooms, in the middle of procedures. And we know that they're happening because we're in your systems anyhow. So yeah, it's something, it's pretty gross. And obviously these folks they don't care. The Register makes a comment about, remember when they used to say they wouldn't ransom medical environments? Well, now they're willing to go all out on this. So, this is something to consider and decide how it is we're going to respond and be prepared ahead of time. Last thing you want to be doing is making this decision under fire. I don't know. You look at this stuff and you just think, wow, how gross can we get? And the answer apparently is very, very gross. So these are things to consider. We got the links in the show notes to Doug's article, mine, as well as the one on the EMSISoft calling for the ban of ransomware payments, something to take a look at and spend some time on. And with that, let's go back over to Dr. Van Staben to wrap up today's show.
Dr. Van Staben. Yeah, Jason, I was gonna add to that too. Sorry, I kind of coattailed on your story there, but it's such a big issue to me because I know how law enforcement has to deal with this kind of stuff, and they want to help people, but when they get involved in these, so if you do have a chance, I already made an appointment to talk to my local police chief about this. Don't tell them how to do their job. They don't appreciate that, but at the same time, if you can get involved and know who your local law enforcement people are, because swatting doesn't just mean SWAT. I mean, I know my SWAT commander. I mean, that's somebody I got on my text list. That's somebody I've known for a long time. But this may go all the way down to local if they're grabbing up people's records and their personal information. And a lot of these attackers are not residents. They don't know who to call, so they just call the local sheriff or somebody. And a lot of those entities don't have huge resources, and they may not have huge intel about this kind of stuff. So if you're either a CIO or someone in the company, find out who you need to call to advise about this stuff, because your small local police may be the ones that get the call, and they may respond dramatically, which is pretty frightening. So thanks, Jason. Great story. Thanks for the commentary. And finally, you want road rage? I'll give you road rage. Now, I'm pulling us into oncoming traffic, Dave. Volkswagen says it intends to inject ChatGPT into its European vehicle line this year, which would allow drivers to ask questions about life, the universe, and everything. They really said that. And of course, when they can't answer with their own personal assistant, they're going to farm that out to ChatGPT. ChatGPT, take the wheel. Who knows? But the German automaker Volkswagen announced this to coincide with the CES show in Las Vegas this week. And they said that the chatbot would be accessible via the IDA voice control assistant, which launched in 2023 and is bundled with a bunch of Volkswagens, particularly all electric ones. The tool in Europe, the tool is supposedly going to allow IDA to have conversations with you to answer questions that are outside the vehicle data or feature. So, IDA, should I pick up a crying hitchhiker that looks like Roy Batty and is carrying a samurai sword? Is that the most Rutger Hauer references in a single sentence ever? I think it's a record, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. There was at least 4 Rutger Hauer references in that. So like tears in the rain, your days of just talking to yourself in the car are just about over. But hey, maybe it counts for the HOV lane. I don't know. ChatGPT was my co-pilot. Maybe. Anyway, as I said before, Happy New Year, unless you follow the Lunar New Year or you just don't participate in celestial events. And if it's Lunar New Year, that's on the 10th of February, so you haven't even had yours yet. But we're glad to be back. We're looking forward to another year with you. I was getting a little jumpy from not being on camera. Thanks, Jason. That's the Security Weekly News, and we'll see you Friday.